Give Me a Reasoning Model by Zvi Mowshowitz, June 10, 2025. Are we doing this again? It looks like we are doing this again. This time it involves giving LLMs several new tasks, including effectively a Tower of Hanoi problem, asking them to specify the answer via individual steps rather than an algorithm, then calling a failure to properly execute all the steps this way, whether or not they even had enough tokens to do it. An inability to reason. The actual work in the paper seems by all accounts to be fine as far as it goes if presented accurately, but the way it is being presented and discussed is not fine. Not thinking clearly?
Ruben Hassid, 12 million views, not how any of this works. Breaking. Apple just proved AI reasoning models like Claude, DeepSeek R1, and O3 Mini don't actually reason at all. They just memorize patterns really well. Here's what Apple discovered. Hint, we're not as close to AGI as the hype suggests. Instead of using the same old math tests that AI companies love to brag about, Apple created fresh puzzle games. They tested Claude Thinking, DeepSeek R1, and O3 Mini on problems these models had never seen before. All reasoning models hit a complexity wall where they completely collapse to 0% accuracy. No matter how much computing power you give them, they can't solve harder problems. As problems got harder, these thinking models actually started thinking less. They used fewer tokens and gave up faster, despite having unlimited budget. And so on.
Thinking again.
Ryan Greenblatt. This paper doesn't show fundamental limitations of LLMs. The higher complexity problems require more reasoning than fits in the context length. Humans would also take too long. Humans would also make errors in the cases where the problem is doable in the context length. I bet models they don't test, in particular O3 or O4 Mini, would perform better and probably get close to solving most of the problems which are solvable in the allowed context length. It's somewhat wild that the paper doesn't realize that solving many of the problems they give the model would clearly require greater than 50K tokens of reasoning, which the model can't do. Of course, the performance goes to zero once the problem gets sufficiently big. The model has a limited context length. A human with a few hours would also fail.
Rohit, I asked O3 to analyze and critique Apple's new LLMs Can't Reason paper. Despite its inability to reason, I think it did a pretty decent job, don't you? Don't get me wrong, it's an interesting paper for sure, like the variations in when catastrophic failure happens. For instance, just a bit overstated ward its positioning.
O3, below is a straight-up fault-finding tour of the illusion of thinking. I'm assuming you've digested the headlines. I focus only on holes in the logic, measurement, and inferences. 1. Task design quietly bakes in an impossible output budget. Exponential move lists. Tower of Hanoi with n equals 15 needs 32,767 moves. N equals 20 tops, 1 million. Even with the 64K token allowance the authors gave their models, the raw list of moves cannot fit after about N14. Collapse is therefore guaranteed no matter how good the reasoning is. The paper never normalizes for this or switches to a proof sketch format. They treat the inevitable truncation as evidence of cognitive failure. See the complexity curves and hard zero accuracy past n equals 15 in Figure 4 and Figure 6. Single format scoring, a model that outputs a concise recursive rule, repeat, move n-1 disks, is marked wrong because the rubric demands the entire move list. The evaluation therefore penalizes abstraction, the very thing you'd want from a reasoning system. 2. Compute parity is ill-defined. Token does not equal flops. They equalize tokens between thinking and non-thinking variants, but a thinking model spends more flops per token, attention over a longer context, extra policy heads, etc. Claiming equivalent inference compute, P-7 is false economy. Temperature 1 sampling. All runs use T equals 1.0, Appendix A2. That maximizes variance and entangles luck with skill. They needed deterministic decoding or large case sampling averaged out. 25 samples per setting is not enough to wash the noise out. 3. Counterintuitive drop in thinking tokens is an artifact why the trace shortens. On the token-limited problems, the model knows it can't finish. It stops early, producing a shorter thought trace. The blue curves that dip in Figure 6 are therefore self-censoring, not evidence of an intrinsic scaling law. External tokens does not equal internal computation. They measure reasoning effort as the number of visible tokens. The actual compute happens in feed-forward passes, not in how much text the model dumps, so the metric is a proxy with no validated correlation to hidden state computation. 4. Algorithm in prompt experiment is stacked. Parsing does not equal executing. In section 4.4, they give the Tower of Hanoi pseudocode and pronounce the model incapable because accuracy still crashes. But the algorithm itself still expands to an exponential move list, goes to same token budget death. They never check whether the model understood the pseudocode. They simply demand the huge list again. 5. Cross-puzzle comparisons are apples and pineapples. Complexity is indexed by n, yet n maps to wildly different search depths across puzzles. See Appendix A3, Figure 9. They plot all puzzles on one axis, Figure 10, and read a causal story from it. The axis is meaningless across tasks.
Kevin Bryan, the reasoning doesn't exist. Apple paper drives me crazy. Take logic puzzle like Tower of Hanoi with tens to hundreds of thousands of moves to solve correctly. Check first step where an LLM makes mistake. Long problems aren't solved. Fewer thought tokens / early mistakes on longer problems. But if you tell me to solve a problem that would take me an hour of pen and paper, but give me 5 minutes, I'll probably give you an approximate solution or a heuristic. This is exactly what foundation models with thinking are RL'd to do. We know from things like code with Claude and internal benchmarks that performance strictly increases as we increase in tokens used for inference on approximately every problem domain tried. But LLM companies can do this. You can't, because model you have access to tries not to overthink. The team on this paper are good, Inkle Yoshua Bengio's brother, but interpretation media folks give it is just wrong. It 100% does not and cannot show reasoning is just pattern matching, beyond trivial fact that all LLMs do nothing more than RL'd token prediction.
The team might be good, but in this case, you don't blame the reaction on the media. The abstract very clearly is laying out the same misleading narrative picked up by the media. You can wish for a media that doesn't get fooled by that, but that's not the world we live in, and the blame is squarely on the way the paper presents itself.
Lisan Al-Ghalib. A few more observations after replicating the Tower of Hanoi game with their exact prompts. You need at least 2 to the power of n-1 moves, and the output format requires 10 tokens per move plus some constant stuff. Furthermore, the output limit for Sonnet 3.7 is 128K, DeepSeek R1 64K, and O3 Mini 100K tokens. This includes the reasoning tokens they use before outputting their final answer. All models will have 0 accuracy, with more than 13 disks, simply because they cannot output that much. At least for Sonnet, it doesn't try to reason through the problem once it's above approximately 7 disks. It will state what the problem and the algorithm to solve it, and then output its solution without even thinking about individual steps. It's also interesting to look at the models as having a X% chance of picking the correct token at each move. Even with a 99.99% probability, the models will eventually make an error simply because of the exponentially growing problem size. But I also observed this peak in token usage across the models I tested at around 911 disks. That's simply the threshold where the models say, "Fuck off, I'm not writing down 2 in disks, 1 steps," and so on.
Tony Gennard, humans aren't solving a 10-disc Tower of Hanoi by hand either.
One draw Nick. If that's true, then this paper from Apple makes no sense.
Lisan Al-Ghalib, it doesn't. Hope that helps.
Galabytes. If I asked you to solve Towers of Hanoi entirely in your head without writing anything down, how tall could the tower get before you'd tell me to fuck off?
My answer to how many before I tell you off is 3. Not that I couldn't do more than 3, but I would choose not to. Inability to think, Colin Fraser, I think gives us a great and clean version of the bear case here.
Colin Fraser, If you can reliably carry out a sequence of logical steps, then you can solve the Tower of Hanoi problem. If you can't solve the Tower of Hanoi problem, then you can't carry out a sequence of logical steps. It's really quite simple and not mysterious. They give it the instructions. They tell it to do the steps. It doesn't do the steps. So-called reasoning doesn't help it do the steps. What else are you supposed to make of this? It can't do the steps.
It seems important that this doesn't follow. 1. Not doing X in a given situation doesn't mean you can't do X in general. 2. Not doing X in a particular test especially doesn't mean a model can't do X. 3. Not doing X can be as simple, you did not provide enough tokens to X issue. 4. The more adversarial the example, the less evidence this provided. 5. Failure to do any given task requiring X does not mean you can't X in general, or more generally, won't or doesn't. X does not show can't X. It is, of course, often evidence, since doing X does prove you can X. How much evidence it provides depends on the circumstances. In brief, to summarize, this is tough but remarkably fair.
Charles Goddard, mind blown. A new paper just shattered everything we thought we knew about AI reasoning. This is paradigm shifting. A must-read, full breakdown below. Thread 1 out of 23.
Paper. Can language models reason? That would be scary, so no. Crimothy Timbleton, Steve van Pronkeldink, Grunch Brown. Abstract. The question of whether large language models, LLMs, exhibit genuine reasoning capabilities remains contentious across computational, cognitive, and philosophical domains. Despite impressive performance on benchmarks traditionally associated with reasoning, fundamental questions persist regarding the nature of these behaviors. In this work, we propose a rigorous framework for distinguishing between apparent reasoning and authentic reasoning, where the latter necessarily requires phenomenological properties that we stipulate a priori to be absent in artificial systems. We argue that language models do not truly reason, as true reasoning requires internal states isomorphic to our own, and cannot, by definition, be instantiated in systems that lack graduate degrees. Through a careful review of prior work, we show that models merely pattern match in ways that look disturbingly like reasoning, but are not, because that would be scary. We conclude with recommendations for terminological hygiene in future work, proposing that terms such as reasoning, understanding, and intelligence be reserved for phenomena exhibiting the precise characteristics we happen to possess.
Lynch, any chance you're looking for a co-author in future work? I want to write a survey paper explaining why, while jobs extremely similar to mine will be easily automatable, my own skill set is unique and special and require a human touch.
What's in a name? Also the periodic reminder that asking "is it really reasoning" is a wrong question.
Yuchen Jin, Ilya Sutskever in his speech at UToronto 2 days ago.
Ilya Sutskever. The day will come when AI will do all the things we can do. The reason is the brain is a biological computer, so why can't the digital computer do the same things?
Yuchen Jin. It's funny that we are debating if AI can truly think or give the illusion of thinking, as if our biological brain is superior or fundamentally different from a digital brain. Ilya's advice to the greatest challenge of humanity ever.
Ilya Sutskever. By simply looking at what AI can do, not ignoring it, that will generate the energy that's required to overcome the huge challenge.
If a different name for what is happening would dissolve the dispute, then who cares?
Colin Fraser. The labs are the ones who gave test-time compute scaling these grandiose names like thinking and reasoning. They could have just not called it that.
I don't see those names as grandiose. I see them as the best practical descriptions in terms of helping people understand what is going on. It seems much more helpful and practical than always saying, test-time compute scaling. Colin suggested long output mode, and I agree that would set expectations lower, but I don't think that describes the central thing going on here at all. Instead, it makes it sound like it's being more verbose.
This has been an episode of the Don't Worry About the Vase podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please visit thezv.substack.com to support the author. If you enjoy having AI-narrated episodes, please note this is a listener-supported podcast. To receive new posts and support the cost of creation, consider becoming a subscriber at dwatvpodcast.substack.com. Thanks for listening.